Looking back, I can still vividly remember the early days of my marriage to Daniel. I loved him with all the passion and trust that a young woman could give to the man she adored. We met at a college party thrown by some mutual friends. He, with his charming looks and captivating smile, made my heart melt from the moment I laid eyes on him. I remember the first time he asked me out for dinner. I felt like I was the luckiest woman in the world. As the years passed, our love matured. After we got married, we moved into a small house in the suburbs, a peaceful place to start our family. And then came Lucas, our adorable little boy, who brought light and joy into our lives. Everything seemed perfect. Every day, I felt grateful for having Daniel in my life, for the fact that we had built a picture-perfect family that so many people envied. But then slowly, I began to feel that something wasn't right. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was this nagging feeling, like a shadow quietly creeping into our marriage. Daniel started traveling more for work, and whenever he came home, there was something different in his eyes. The spark I had once fallen in love with seemed to have dimmed. He told me work was busier than ever, and I believed him. After all, I always thought he was just working hard for the sake of our family. I've always been the one to take care of everything at home, from making sure Lucas got to school on time, to cooking dinner and keeping our home in order. Every evening, I would set the table, hoping Daniel would walk through the door in time for dinner. Lucas adored his father, and every night, he'd eagerly wait for him to come home. "Mom, is Dad going to be home for dinner tonight?" Lucas would ask, his big, hopeful eyes looking up at me. I'd smile and gently stroke his soft hair, trying to sound optimistic. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. Dad said work was really busy today, but he'll try to make it home as soon as he can." I always hoped Daniel would make it. Every time he walked through the door, I longed for things to go back to the way they used to be. Us sitting together, sharing a meal, talking about our day. But that wasn't happening anymore. Dinner became a quiet affair, just Lucas and me, while Daniel's seat remained empty. Lucas was disappointed, but I kept telling him that his father loved us and was just overwhelmed with work. As time went on, the uneasy feeling inside me grew stronger. Daniel would come home late more often, sometimes smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize. I told myself it was probably just from someone at the office. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That creeping sense of anxiety would slip in, like a cold wind brushing against my skin, keeping me up at night. Once, after he returned from a long business trip, I tried to ask him about the changes I'd been noticing. I told him I was worried, that I felt like he wasn't the same anymore. But Daniel just laughed it off, brushing my concerns aside. "Oh, Emma, you're overthinking this. I'm just busy, that's all. This is an important time for the company, and I want to make sure our family has a secure future." He made it sound so simple, and I, trusting him with all my heart, chose to believe what he said. But the gnawing doubt never really went away. Night after night, I lay awake, wondering if I was doing the right thing by staying silent. I didn't want to become the kind of wife who questioned her husband's every move. I didn't want to believe that the man I had loved for so long could be hiding something from me. The days passed in a routine of waiting and silence. I kept myself busy, focusing on Lucas and keeping our home running smoothly. Daniel was absent more often than not, and even when he was home, it felt like I was living with a stranger. The loneliness grew, not from a lack of people around me, but from the distance that had formed between Daniel and me. I missed the days when we were younger, when we would go on walks in the park, or simply lay on the couch and talk. But those memories now seemed so distant, like they belonged to another life. There were nights when I would sit by the window in our bedroom, watching the streetlights outside flicker in the darkness, wondering if I was living in a long dream, one that was on the verge of collapsing. Tonight was no different. I sat on our bed, in the dimly lit room, waiting for Daniel to come home. Lucas had been asleep for hours, and I was left alone, as usual, to wait. I glanced at the clock, 10 p.m., then 11 p.m., but still, Daniel hadn't come home. My phone sat silent on the bedside table, no calls or messages from him. I debated whether or not to call him, but then hesitated. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife, always checking up on her husband. but the knot of worry in my stomach had grown too tight to ignore. Maybe I'm just overreacting, I whispered to myself, trying to push away the dread that had settled in my chest. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I could sense that the storm was coming. The streetlights outside cast long shadows into our bedroom. I sat there in the stillness, searching for a flicker of light to calm the storm inside me. But tonight, everything felt too far away, too unfamiliar. I wasn't sure of anything anymore, except for one undeniable truth. Something in our marriage had broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. Things only got worse in the days that followed. Daniel was home less and less, and when he was, it felt like he wasn't really there. Despite his reassurances, the change in him was too obvious to ignore. He stopped talking to me as much, and whenever we were together, the unspoken tension between us felt heavier, as if it was suffocating the air around us. One evening, when Daniel came home late again, I decided to wait for him in the living room. A powerful sense of unease had been building up inside me. Every second that passed only made that feeling grow stronger, until I couldn't sit still anymore. I paced back and forth in our dimly lit home, my footsteps echoing through the silence. Everything felt like it was teetering on the edge of an explosion. And then, finally, the door opened. Daniel walked in, looking tired but showing no sign of guilt. He saw me sitting there, his eyes cold, nothing like the man who once adored me. I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest, but instead of lashing out, I asked a simple question, though deep down I already knew the answer. "Where were you tonight?" Daniel paused, as if considering how to answer. He didn't rush, didn't seem flustered at all. He simply said, "At work, like I told you. Things have been really busy lately." I looked him in the eye, searching for something, some flicker of remorse, a sign of unease, but all I found was emptiness. "I feel like you're hiding something," I said, my voice trembling, not with fear but with frustration. Daniel let out a soft chuckle, as if what I'd said was amusing. "Emma, you're overthinking it. I told you, there's nothing going on, you're just worrying too much." But no, this time, I couldn't let his calm words brush away my concerns anymore. Since when did a wife have to live in doubt about the happiness of her own marriage? I knew something bigger was being hidden, something that Daniel was carefully concealing from me. I began noticing every little detail that I had perhaps ignored before. Strange receipts tucked in his pockets, phone calls he avoided when I came near. One time, I accidentally glimpsed a text message on his phone from an unknown number. The message was simple but laden with meaning. "Today was amazing. I miss you." My heart sank. I had tried to avoid facing this before, but now the truth was staring me in the face. It felt like a trap was slowly closing in around me, and I couldn't escape. In the days that followed, an invisible wall seemed to rise between me and Daniel. We barely spoke anymore. He continued leaving early and coming home late, while I tried to keep life as normal as possible for Lucas. My little boy had started noticing the tension between his parents, and that hurt me more than anything else. I didn't want Lucas to feel any insecurity, but children are always perceptive. I saw the way he looked at me during dinner. His eyes filled with quiet concern when he realized his father wouldn't be joining us. Sometimes, Lucas would come over and sit beside me, asking softly, "Mom, will Dad be home soon?" I forced a smile, running my fingers through his soft hair, but each time my smile felt more forced than the last. "I don't know, sweetheart. Dad is really busy," I replied, but deep down, I knew Daniel wasn't just busy with work anymore. He was busy with something else, something that had taken him away from me, from us. One evening, I decided I couldn't just sit and wait in silence any longer. After Lucas had gone to bed, I grabbed my keys and drove to Daniel's office. It was 9 p.m., and he was supposed to be there, working, as he had said so many times before. But when I arrived, the office was closed, the building dark, except for a few dim lights inside. There was no sign of Daniel. I sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. I had the sinking feeling that I was about to uncover something horrible, something I didn't want to face, but couldn't ignore any longer. When I finally returned home, it was already 10 p.m. Daniel still wasn't back. The emptiness and disappointment flooded over me, but along with it came a rising anger. I couldn't keep avoiding the truth. I needed to know. And this time, I wasn't gonna let Daniel cover it up with sweet lies. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring into the darkness. Daniel still hadn't come home, and I knew that from this moment on, things could never go back to the way they were. Something was being hidden, and I couldn't let the silence control my life any longer. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, Daniel returned home as if nothing had happened. He walked in with his usual confidence, still wearing the suit from the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands gripping a cup of coffee, trying to keep myself calm. I had spent all night thinking about how I would confront him. I wanted the truth, but I was terrified of what that truth might do to everything we had built together. The internal struggle gnawed at me, but I knew I couldn't back down any longer. Daniel looked at me and flashed that same smile he always used to diffuse my suspicions. "Good morning, love. You look tired. Did you sleep okay?" I set the coffee down, never breaking eye contact with him. "Do you really think I wouldn't notice?" I asked, my voice low but sharp enough to wipe the smile off his face. He stopped in his tracks, staring at me a little longer, as though trying to read my mind. "What are you talking about, Emma?" I stood, meeting his gaze, my emotions a mix of anger and pain. "Where were you last night? And not just last night, where have you really been during all those late nights at work?" Daniel hesitated but tried to maintain his composure. "Emma, I've already told you, I was just..." "Stop lying." I cut him off, my voice rising in a way it rarely did. "I went to your office last night, Daniel. You weren't there. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I want the truth." A heavy silence filled the room. I stared at him, waiting for his response. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Finally, Daniel let out a deep sigh, one that felt as though it carried the weight of an inevitable moment he had been trying to avoid. The calm mask he always wore slipped away, revealing a tired, conflicted man underneath. "All right," he said slowly, his voice quieter than usual. "I guess you deserve to know the truth." His words cut through the air like a knife, and suddenly, the room felt suffocating. Even though I had prepared myself for the worst, hearing Daniel actually admit that something was wrong shook me to my core. "I've been having an affair," Daniel confessed, his eyes dropping to the floor, unable to meet mine. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but yes, I've messed up." I stood there, frozen, as if the ground beneath me had disappeared. His words seemed to echo in the room, each one stabbing at my heart. My pulse quickened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. "With who?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Someone from work. It's been going on for a few months now." The pain spread through my body like wildfire, consuming every inch of me. The betrayal, the deception, it was too much to bear. I felt like I was sinking into an abyss, one I couldn't crawl out of. "Why?" I choked out, tears burning in my eyes though I fought to hold them back. "Why would you do this to me, to us, to our family?" Daniel sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands, looking like a man broken by his own mistakes. "I don't have an excuse, Emma. It started out as harmless meetings, and then it went too far. I didn't know how to stop it. But this doesn't mean I don't love you or Lucas. I lost my way." He spoke with regret, but his words had lost their meaning for me. "Love us?" I said bitterly, my voice thick with disbelief. "If you loved us, why did you betray us? Why choose deception instead of confronting our problems? You've destroyed everything I believed in." I couldn't listen to any more of his pathetic explanations. The hurt was too raw, and my anger was spilling over. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my legs trembling under me as if I might collapse at any moment. "Emma, wait." Daniel called after me, but I didn't stop. I headed straight for the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Really cry. It all came crashing down on me at once. The betrayal, the lies, the broken pieces of what I thought was our life together. Outside the door, I could hear Daniel's footsteps. He was standing there, probably waiting for me to say something, to react, but all I could do was cry, feeling the weight of his betrayal tear my heart apart. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what this marriage even meant. The days following the revelation dragged on like a never-ending nightmare. I could no longer look Daniel in the eye, and I couldn't see our marriage the same way again. Every time my gaze fell on him, my heart ached, but not out of love. Rather, from the pain and betrayal that simmered beneath the surface. Daniel tried to talk to me several times, but I couldn't bear to face him. Everything felt so distant, as if we were living in two separate worlds. He continued going to work, but I no longer cared whether he actually went to the office or not. There were moments when I wondered if I should forgive him, for Lucas, for our small family. But every time I looked at my own reflection in the mirror, I was reminded of the hurt he had caused. I began questioning my life. Who was I without Daniel? I had devoted so many years to building this marriage, and now I felt like my entire existence had crumbled. One morning, after dropping Lucas off at school, I sat in the car outside our home, my mind blank. I didn't know what to do next. I might have sat there for hours, staring blankly ahead, but my thoughts were nowhere to be found. Finally, I picked up my phone and called my mother. She was the only person I could trust at that moment. I hadn't told her about Daniel because I feared I would hear the disappointment in her voice. But I couldn't keep this inside any longer. I needed advice, a direction. "Emma, what's wrong?" My mother's voice was filled with concern as soon as she answered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my throat tightened. "Mom, Daniel has betrayed me." The words spilled out, and I couldn't stop the choked sobs that followed. There was a pause on the other end, as if she was trying to grasp the meaning of what I just said. Then she sighed softly. "Oh, my daughter." I poured out everything to her, about how Daniel had lied throughout the past months, and how I felt like everything I believed in had been shattered. My mother listened without interrupting, but I could hear the worry in her breaths. "Have you thought about leaving him?" she asked gently, yet seriously. I didn't answer right away. That thought had lingered in my mind for days. But leaving Daniel was not just about leaving a husband. It was about abandoning a part of my life that I had spent my youth building. It was not an easy decision. "I don't know what to do, Mom," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can forgive him, but I can't imagine a life without him either. I have Lucas to think about. I don't want him to grow up in a broken family." "Sweetheart, only you know what your heart truly wants," my mother said gently. "But remember, you have your own worth. Don't let anyone, not even Daniel, make you feel unworthy of love and respect. Whether you choose to stay or leave, it should be for yourself and for Lucas." Her words resonated with me. Perhaps my mother was right. I had spent too much time thinking about Daniel and trying to understand why he did this, but I had forgotten about myself in this whole narrative. I deserved to be loved, to be respected, and I needed to find myself again, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. That evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, I walked into the living room where Daniel was sitting. He looked up as I entered, seeming surprised that I was taking the initiative to talk. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. Daniel set down the book he was reading and looked at me with a worried expression. "I know I've made mistakes," Daniel started immediately, "and I would do anything to make it right. But I can't lose you and Lucas." I sat down across from him, locking eyes with the man I had once loved so deeply. "Daniel, you've betrayed me. You've betrayed my trust and destroyed everything I thought we had." My voice was steady, filled with determination. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if we can go back to how things were. But what I do know is that I need time. Not just to think about you, but to think about myself, about Lucas, and about my future." Daniel remained silent, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand," he said quietly. "I can't demand your forgiveness right away. But please, don't leave me." "I don't know," I whispered. "But for now, I need time to figure out what I really want." After that conversation, I felt a little lighter. I no longer felt trapped. I decided I would temporarily distance myself from Daniel. It wasn't an immediate decision to divorce, but rather a time for me to regain my composure and think about everything. I needed to prioritize myself, to understand what I truly needed and wanted, instead of just worrying about others. I made the decision to take Lucas back to my mother's house for a while. I needed space, and I needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our home. My life stood at a crossroads, and for the first time in a long while, I felt I was taking control of my own destiny. Whatever my final choice would be, I knew I would no longer be the weak woman trapped in pain and betrayal. I would find myself again, and I would make the right decision for myself and my son. Returning to my mother's house felt like stepping into a whirlwind of emotions. Although I knew it was the right decision, guilt lingered in the corners of my mind. I worried about Daniel, about Lucas, and about what would happen to the family I once loved. But more than anything, I knew I had to rediscover myself. In the early days of living with my mother, I began to feel a sense of liberation. She had arranged a space for me to think and find some peace. I spent quality time with Lucas, playing and doing activities we hadn't had time for while living in our own home. My mother was an incredible support, always listening to me share my thoughts and continuously encouraging me. One afternoon, while we were sipping tea, she looked at me and said, "Emma, you don't need to feel guilty. You're doing the right thing for both you and Lucas. Remember, sometimes we need to let go of the old to embrace the new." I smiled, feeling warmth from her words. Perhaps this was the time to start anew. I began attending yoga and meditation classes, helping my mind find a sense of calm. Each time I sat in silence with myself, I felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that I had lost. One evening, while meditating, it struck me how much I had lost, not just love, but my very essence. I had been afraid to pursue my passions and dreams, living solely for my husband and child. Now, with Daniel no longer by my side, it was time to live for me. I decided to explore new things, from attending art workshops to enrolling in a creative writing course. I had always had a passion for writing, but had never taken the time to pursue it. I started jotting down my feelings, thoughts, and experiences, and surprisingly, writing brought me relief and freedom. After some time living at my mother's, I decided to attend a community event. As I walked in, I was enveloped by a joyful atmosphere filled with energy. It was there that I met a man named Michael. He was a local artist, with warm eyes and a friendly smile. We talked throughout the evening, and I felt a special connection with him. Michael knew nothing about my past, but he constantly encouraged me to pursue my writing dreams. His confidence helped me realize that life still held beautiful possibilities. I returned home from the event feeling uplifted. Although Daniel had caused me immense pain, I began to see that I could build a new life without him. I decided not to return, not only because of the betrayal, but because I had begun to find myself. One evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, I sat down to write a letter to Daniel. I needed to express my feelings clearly. In the letter, I wrote about the hurt he had caused, but also mentioned that I had found the strength to move on. I no longer wanted to live in his shadow. I wanted to live for myself and for Lucas. Once I finished the letter, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. I decided to mail it, and part of me felt anxious. I didn't know how Daniel would react, but I understood that this was a necessary step for me to move forward. Finally, I made the decision to leave our old home, a place filled with painful memories. I was ready to start anew with Lucas, carrying fresh dreams and hopes. I knew there would be many challenges ahead, but I felt more confident than ever. I was no longer the weak woman tormented by pain and betrayal. I had discovered strength within myself and dared to step out of my comfort zone to embrace new experiences. Life would go on, and I was ready for a new beginning, filled with hope and dreams. Thank you for joining us on Emma's journey in her quest for love and self-discovery. Through the struggles and challenges, we've witnessed the strength and resilience of a person facing pain. If you felt moved and connected to this story, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think about Emma's journey and the lessons you took away from it. Thank you for taking the time to watch our channel. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue sharing heartfelt and meaningful stories. We wish you a wonderful day ahead and hope you always find strength in difficult moments. Remember, every day is a new opportunity to start again. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more exciting content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future videos. We'll be back with more new stories, and we look forward to sharing this journey with you. See you in the next video.